Welcome to New York's #2 sports show. The Rangers lose to the Crosby-less Penguins 3-2 at Madison Square Garden. An inexcusable loss for the Rangers. By the way, Pittsburgh was also without Evgeny Malkin, but I'm not even going to even go that far. But Rangers basically were just, it was like a stroll in the park the first 40 minutes. And then they finally started to play some semblance of hockey in the third period, but it was too late. They were attempting to win three straight when trailing going into the third period. They'd won back-to-back doing so, down by one against Vegas going into the third, they won, down by one against Boston going into the third, they won, down by one against Pittsburgh, they didn't win. They were down 3-2 going into the third, and that was the final score. Just, where points are at a premium and you're facing one of the worst teams in the league. Pittsburgh Penguins are one of the worst teams in the league. And you combine that with the fact that Sidney Crosby, who is their best player, out. And Rangers still lose. And it goes to show you that effort, if you give that 100% effort and it goes up against talent and basically no work ethic, that the effort's going to win. And that's exactly what happened in this game. And too many times we've seen this. And it's really unacceptable. I mean, that is kind of the theme of what Peter Laviolette said, and he deserves blame as well. I mean, it's on his watch. Now, for me, it's always been more about the core that deserves the blame more than getting another head coach fired. But everyone's in this together. And so now there's just one more game, the second game of the back-to-back at Columbus. And that will tell you a lot as well as far as just the feeling, forgetting about the mathematics and where they are on the standings, but just the feeling of the team going into the break. Like that will be a big one against the Columbus team that is in this race. But it's just hard to really think, and I don't really even know how it would be even feasible based on the lack of draft capital the Rangers currently have. Like to be buyers is kind of insane, first off. And I really think that the Rangers, as much as they can be, I think they should try to be sellers. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be this exponentially worse team, right? Like, for example, even though this isn't the theme I want to bring about in this game, but if you traded a Ryan Lindgren, you could still become a better team by doing that and still selling and getting some draft picks in the process. Or bringing up young players from Hartford and maybe bringing a little bit of different energy to the team. So you can still kind of play both cards. What we do know is this team is not anywhere near cup contention. And that's unfortunate considering the fact that that they were last year. And, the roster this year isn't terribly different. It's a little bit different for sure, but in some ways they've improved and cutting some of the dead weight out. I mean, and I'm specifically speaking of Trouba, right? I mean, in other areas where where there's different players, and I guess I'm also talking about Barclay Goodrow as well. I think going from Goodrow to Carrick has been a net positive overall. But look, like there's no doubt that there were some other moves that were made that may not have necessarily strengthened the team. But I don't know. We can go top down as far as this game and what went wrong. But like you look at that Pittsburgh roster, it is rough. I mean, there are recognizable players, right, such as like Erik Karlsson and Chris Letang, for example. But those are older defensemen that have seen much better days. So even the names, I mean, again, the only few that you've heard of and that to me at least are still good and effective is like Rickard Rakell and Brian Rust. And again, there's some more there as well, but Alex Nedeljkovic is not, anywhere near a world-class goaltender. And you need more from Igor Shesterkin. You do. I mean, I find myself in situations where the loss isn't on him, but he's a part of it. And with Igor, getting that contract, there's going to be a lot more of an emphasis on him needing to find a way to win these games. And you're looking for that big save. Yeah. Were any of the goals necessarily horrible? No. But like that, the game-winning goal by Tomasino, yes, it's an open look and it's terrible that he was that wide open, but it's a clear view, right? No screen, no deflection. It's right on site. And, and he can't make the stop. Right. So Igor is a part of this equation as well. And again, because of the fact that, hey, when you're going to be paid $11.5 million for the next, what was it, 8 years? I mean, 8 years, right? Like you're going to be expected to do big things, right? So there's that. Um, Lines got all mixed around, right? So I don't know what it's going to look like going to the Columbus game. Um, as far as the defense, I guess we'll start there. Um, Valkonen was out due to illness, which again is kind of convenient. It keeps Zach Jones in the lineup, and it doesn't necessarily have Valkonen as a healthy scratch. Curious to see what happens against Columbus. I wouldn't be surprised if it's going to be Valkonen in for Jones, which again is sending the wrong message, right? Like the moves that are going to be made are ones that like the players, like Zach Jones, he wasn't, particularly great in this game, but like I don't know if that's necessarily the answer, but that's here nor there. Um, I have more criticisms with a lot of the forwards um, in this game than necessarily the defensemen. Um, like Adam Fox's stats look good overall. He scores a goal. He was a +2. But again, like with him, I just feel like he's not as good a player as he was a few years ago. Um, and don't get me wrong, like he is definitely like your best defense on the team. He is a really good player. He was never someone that had a bunch of quickness or speed, but I don't know. I with him, um, this is not the same guy that we saw a few years ago. But again, I'm not going to harp on that too much. Uh, Again, Lindgren, another one who ends up with good stats, but he made a really bad turnover early that ended up in a good chance for Anthony Beauvillier, which was stopped by Shesterkin. So again, right out of the gates, Lindgren with a bad turnover, but it didn't cost them, as far as goals against. Um, Will Borgen kind of messes up on the tying goal. He wasn't the main culprit, but he was a part of it. And look, Zach Jones played 15 minutes. I like what he brought to the table. He was on for the first goal against. Um, and I think that they're not huge fans of Zach Jones. And I think that Vakanainen, when the opportunity is there, he'll be in, whether that be against Columbus, next game, or whether that's after the Four Nations break. But that will happen for sure. As far as the forwards go, and again, like these lines were complete. I can't even really tell you what they ended up being. Like the old, like I truly can't. It was that much like different shift by shift. But just know that like these lines were scrambled. And I think the big thing that kind of made that happen, and it might have even happened, to be honest, it may have occurred before, but the one that really supplanted it was Alexis Lafreniere, who had an assist, and actually was a +1 to be fair. He has been brutal in terms of back checking, where he chooses not to move his feet. He just stays flat, and it was plain to see. I mean, and again, Will Borgen probably left a little bit too much space on the right side, but Lafreniere just stops moving, and Raquel blows by him and ends up scoring. Unacceptable for Alexis Lafreniere, and we see it all the time. Like, you can't do that. Not that it's right for anyone to do that. It really isn't, right? Even if you're a veteran, but it's like, Alexi, you haven't been in the league that long. Quite honestly, you've been a disappointment as a number 1 overall pick. As much as I still think that this can be a really, really good player, like, and for you to just be, half-assing it, it's not great. And it also speaks to the core of the team. It also, you know what I mean? Like, so blame goes to Lafreniere, but hey, like that's kind of the mentality and the culture of this team, which is why the core needs to be gutted, because he sees the top guys regularly just kind of going for a glide. But Lafreniere is definitely one of the main ones that does it. And how many times this year have we seen that lead to goals where he is just standing there, and then you see him putting into the next gear, and it's too late. So that was just really, really bad. And he basically sat out the rest of the second period because of that, and deservedly so. He really should have. And you want to see that same accountability from Laviolette for other players as well. Um, you know, trying to think where else to go here. Um, let's discuss the game, and from there, that'll lead to some conversation points. Again, goaltending matchup: Alex Nedeljkovic versus Igor Shesterkin, and Pittsburgh's been bad lately. And this was the first game that Sidney Crosby was out. He got hurt in the last game they put against the Devils. He actually, he finished the game, but he didn't practice. the day after, but then he was skating before, earlier in the day of this game. But they go the cautious route and don't play him. Um, and so you look at that and it's like, okay, I mean, Evgeny Malkin's been out. Look, I'm not as high on Evgeny Malkin. That's why I don't want to make a big deal of it. But optically, and look, Malkin's numbers there's a lot of offensive numbers there. I'm assuming that's a lot of power play stuff, if I'm guessing. Um, but like this Pittsburgh team is unrecognizable. And the names, it's just like a lot of guys that are kind of tweeners between the NHL and AHL are really, or players that haven't spent that much time on the Penguins, right? They're like first year players or recently acquired players, and they go into MSG and the Penguins, they're basically out of it, right? Barring an absolute miracle, this team's done. Look, they've already been in sell mode. They traded Marcus Pettersson, who was one of their top defensemen, to the Vancouver Canucks. Like they are basically waving the white flag on the season. And they beat the Rangers. And think about this: too many times this year, the Rangers lost like home against Chicago. They lost at Nashville, and there's many others. I mean, they lost 2 games to the Blues. And again, they lost. And again, this one isn't as bad. I'm just kind of thinking about it in my mind. They lost to the Flyers, and the Phillies not a great team. Again, that one's forgivable. I mean, it's a divisional team, and it's not like Philly is an absolute joke. It's more so, again, it's the home versus Chicago, home versus Pittsburgh with no Crosby, at Nashville. Yeah, I mean, look, even losing home against Seattle wasn't good. There's a lot of bad losses when you look at this season. The Rangers, luckily for them, and what keeps them kind of in the mix is they've done well against their direct competition, but they have not done well against the top teams of the league, and they've given up many, many points to the dregs of the league. And losing regulation as well. I mean, at least if you can get 1 point here and there along the way, that's one thing. No points. Too many regulation losses for this team. They don't look like a playoff team. Nothing tells me that they are. Even in these wins lately, it's by the skin of their teeth. It really is. So, first period for the Rangers, not great, not terrible, like, you know, decent enough, I guess. And that's being fair. The Rangers were kind of fortunate to be up by 1-0. Where really it's ugly is the second period. But in the first, Rangers do take the lead on a goal by Vincent Trocheck. The Pittsburgh native scores his 17th goal of the season, assisted by Alexis Lafreniere. And what happens here is Lindgren, from the red line, shoots it, into the corner. And Erik Karlsson is pressured a bit by Lafreniere. So again, credit where it's due. Lafreniere putting a little bit of pressure on Karlsson. It deflects off of Lafreniere. Karlsson tries to pass it. It deflects off of Lafreniere and right to Vincent Trocheck, who's in a perfect position right in the middle of the ice, and he wires it past Nedeljkovic. So good for Trocheck, who, I have been a little bit critical of lately. He has responded, at least on the goal, on the stat sheet, getting goals, getting points. And so a big goal at that point where, you hadn't really gotten much production from the middle six, right? So like at that point, you have the Miller, Panarin, Semanagic line has been doing things, but you're not getting much from the Trocheck or Brodzinski lines. And that's kind of by design based on them going with this top heavy lineup. So that makes it one of the Rangers with a bad too many men on the ice penalty at 10:32 that was killed off. Not to say Pittsburgh didn't get plenty of chances, and Igor had a good first period. I'll give him that. But Rangers were outshot 11-8 in the first. They go to the second period, and it was almost like a bad thing. The fact that the Rangers were up was almost sending the wrong message. Like the Rangers were down 1-0. You may have seen, not that it should work like this. They should be self-motivated regardless, but maybe more of an attack. But it was like they probably felt good about themselves when they shouldn't have. And Pittsburgh ratcheted up in the second period even more than the first. Just really one of the worst periods you'll see. So second period, Pittsburgh is controlling play, and at 2:25 after a bad turnover by Matt Rempe, and we're seeing this too often. And let me see Rempe's minutes. I'm going to guess it's not much. Okay, actually a little more than I thought. 8 minutes. They did still roll him out there, which is fair. 8 minutes and 34 seconds for Rempe, but we've seen, Rempe with where he is on the team. And look, I think the fourth line has been a bright spot. Adam Edstrom was a big part of it. Sam Carrick's a really big part of it, and Rempe as well. But lately, he has had some really bad turnovers. And when you're a player like that, who isn't going to provide you that much on the offensive side, you cannot be, it's a cross-eyes pass in the direction of VC that gets intercepted in the neutral zone, and they go in with some speed, and Pittsburgh scores to tie it up. At 2:25, Blake Lizotte, the former King, scores his ninth goal of the season from Achari and Carlson. Zach Jones was in the vicinity here. I think Braden Schneider as well. That was the D pair that was on. And that ties it up at 1. However, a really good quick response to the Rangers. Only a minute and 14 seconds after the Lizotte goal, Adam Fox scores his 4th goal of the season from Trocheck and Lindgren. Fox had a lot of room off the pass by Trocheck and just steps in and risks it past Nedeljkovic to give the Rangers 2-1 lead. So at this point, you're thinking, okay, quick response. That's a good sign. But it wouldn't matter. At 9:07, Ricard Raquel scores his 25th goal of the season from Rust and Beauvillier. And what happens here is Panarin turns it over in the offensive zone. And with Panarin, really, it's very frustrating. And I think if you had a certain type of team, Artemi Panarin, it's more forgivable and it's more acceptable. Like his style of play, there's too many players like Panarin. I mean, Panarin's unique in his play style, but like in terms of just the softness and the finesse and no physicality, like Panarin is one of many, and he stands out because of who he is, and he's the highest paid player on the team. So Panarin turns it over, not good, and like he is very frustrating when he's not going well. Like he's one of the most frustrating players to watch. And so now Pittsburgh takes it the other way. And it ends up in a situation where Brian Rust has the puck down the right side. And Will Borgen, first off, kind of cheats over to the left too much and gives that, gives too much side on the left side. Pittsburgh's left, Rangers right. And Lafreniere, Raquel was Lafreniere's guy. And Raquel just keeps on going towards the net, and Lafreniere stops skating. So Raquel has easy access, and Shesterkin, I think, was a little too aggressive, and Raquel scores past him. Wasn't a terrible goal by Igor, but again, we've seen that a little bit lately where, again, he should have been a little bit more calm, and I think, he was a little out of control there, honestly. But terrible defense as well. Borgen to a lesser degree, Lafreniere more so. And it basically saw Lafreniere sit out for basically, I think he had one more shift, and then he was out for the rest of the period. That ties it up at 2. And similar to the Boston game, and similar to what we've seen a lot this season, is it's not just one goal the Rangers allowed, it's 2. And Will Cooley at 11:02 trips Anthony Beauvillier. It's a bad penalty, and Will Cooley has not been good enough lately. Yeah, I like him, and I like what he's going to bring, and I think that he's been dealt sort of a bad hand in terms of his line mates, but Will Cooley, not good enough. The results have dropped off completely, and that's just a bad penalty to take. You need more from him. And Pittsburgh takes advantage of it. They score on the power play. Tomasino scores his 7th goal of the season from Rust and Bunting. And this was a play where Tomasino's all by himself near the left circle. And Rust makes a nice little play where Bunting makes a pass and Rust just barely deflects it. He knew what he was doing. He knew that he had Tomasino behind him, so it lays it for him perfectly. And he snaps it past Shesterkin. And this is what I was talking about earlier. Yes, unacceptable defense, and it's on the penalty kill, which has been, by and large, a bright spot for the Rangers. It's not been amazing, but it's been good. It has been. And Tomasino scores, makes it 3-2. Why he was that wide open, I'm not quite sure. I believe that Fox and Miller were the defensemen on, as well as Kreider and Zibanejad, I think, were the forwards. That makes it 3-2 Penguins. From there, Rangers would take another penalty that period. Riley Smith, the former Penguin, trips Beauvillier, so the former Islander. Beauvillier draws another penalty at 17:52. And Pittsburgh had a lot of good chances on this power play, but the Rangers were able to prevent a goal. So they're only down 3-2 in the third, but you're playing with fire. I mean, the last 2 games, the Rangers came back, sure, but they hadn't done that all season. So to expect them to do it in 3 straight games was a lot to ask, and it doesn't happen. In that second period, the Rangers were outshot 15-9. The shot attempts were ridiculous through 2 periods. It was like 40-something to like 16 late into the second period. Like, it's just inexcusable. That's the word I'm using. And, well, that's crazy, too. I'm seeing Sidney Crosby. The Penguins won a game without Sidney Crosby the first time since November 11th, 2021. Just It gets worse and worse. Third period's interesting. The Penguins get no shots on goal. There's a stat. This is the first time in I think about 5 or 6 years where a team won a game by I think one. I think was the stat. Which again, with the empty net goals or lack thereof, that's a little bit of a misleading stat. I think that's what it was though. A 1-goal win for a team that had 0 shots on goal in the third period. First time it's happened in about 5 or 6 years. And that's what happened here. And the shot attempts were very much slanted in the Ranger direction. Rangers were the better team, but you know what? The Rangers didn't get that many great chances. The first maybe 2-3 minutes of the period they did. But then after that, it was kind of just a nothing burger on both sides, which is exactly what Pittsburgh wanted. But eventually, what makes this game even more embarrassing is the Rangers had 2 power play opportunities late. At 13:45, P.O. Josephs interferes with Jimmy Vesey, and the Rangers basically got nothing going at all. Then at 17:24, Michael Bunting holds Adam Fox. So it eventually becomes a 6-on-4 situation. And this is probably where they got some of their best chances. Towards the end of that power play, again, a pathetic power play against what I believe to be is a very subpar Penguin penalty kill. A lot of blocked shots by Pittsburgh. They were sprawling out and doing what they had to do. Shots were also wide. Nedeljkovic did make some saves, but ultimately, Rangers don't score, and Pittsburgh wins 3-2. Just a disturbing loss for this team, and they can't afford it. And it just says a lot about who they are. And you never want to get too high or too low. I try to be reasonable with that, right? Like, if the Rangers beat Columbus tomorrow, then a lot of this bad feeling does go away. That's just the way that it works. But it could be compounded. They lose again, then it's a bigger conversation. So you don't know where it's going to go. But this was the last game at Madison Square Garden for a while, actually, because I believe actually the first. I don't think they play. I think this might have actually been their last game at the Garden for another 3 weeks, because I think that they play their first 3 games out of the break on the road. So approximately, I think you're looking at 3 weeks, maybe flat even, until they play at home again. So we'll see what they do. But again, like, with the Penguins missing some of their best players, their leaders, the players that they're out of the playoff race. And they've been bad lately. They're selling off, and the Rangers get no points at home. That's how you don't make the playoffs. And that's where you really have to think very, very hard about being a seller. Now, you don't have to make the decision now. Trade deadline's not until about a month away. But there's not that many games left with that 2-week break. There's less than 10 games. I know that. I think there might be maybe 7, 8, 9 games at most until that trade deadline. And this is what they're showing. And so that is going to hopefully influence Chris Drury. So a bad loss. We'll see tomorrow. My thought was that Shesterkin will start against Columbus. I still believe that. But hey, if they go with Quick, no complaints. Like, to me, it's fair game either way. I think the plan was Igor, and I think they'll probably stick with that. But we'll see what happens. And, as far as line changes and, Arthur Kaliev was healthy scratch. Is there any chance that he comes in the lineup? I guess it's possible. After a game like this, it is. So, we'll see. But this is really going to be a very important game, not only for the standings, but just the morale heading into the break. This season could really, really teeter away very quickly, more so than the other way. The Rangers are in a position where they need points. Like, they can't afford to give away 2 points to a bad Pittsburgh Penguins team. That's exactly what they did. So a really, really disturbing bad loss by the New York Rangers at Madison Square Garden against the Sidney Crosby-less Pittsburgh Penguins. They lose to Pittsburgh 3-2. And now it's a quick turnaround. They'll travel to Columbus for the last game before the break in a really big matchup versus the Blue Jackets. We'll see what they do. They really need to respond after what was a really, really distasteful night at Madison Square Garden.